Bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum.
Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Shouldice, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, we focus on rhythm skills learned at the verbal association level of the skill learning sequence. Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Musicality podcast. Today, I'm continuing the mini-series of episodes on the verbal association skill level. I started back in episode 41 with an introduction to the skill level of verbal association. Then in episode 42, I talked about choosing tonal, solfege, and rhythm syllable systems that work well with MLT-based instruction, since the verbal association skill level is the point at which we begin using syllables in music learning theory. In episode 43, I talked about tonal skills taught and learned at the verbal association level. And then in the last episode, number 44, I gave an overview of Gordon's system of classifying rhythm pattern function. That will come up again in today's episode, which will focus on the rhythm skills taught and learned at the verbal association skill level. Remember that previously at the aural-oral skill level, the rhythm skills we would be focusing on were moving to macrobeats and microbeats and chanting them on neutral syllables, echoing rhythm patterns on neutral syllables, and recognizing familiar rhythm patterns within a song or chant. Once students have developed those skills at aural-oral with certain content, they experience the same content at the verbal association level with the addition of rhythm syllables. In addition, students learn to use syllables as a tool for naming familiar meters and rhythm pattern functions at the verbal association level. And remember, since verbal association is a level of discrimination learning, the teacher should model all skills before asking students to perform those skills. If you're newer to MLT and aren't familiar with that term discrimination learning, or if you want a quick overview of the skill learning sequence in MLT, check out episode 9. I'll link to that in the show notes. So, rhythm skills at the verbal association level. First, moving to macrobeats and microbeats and chanting them with rhythm syllables. I talked about teaching students to move to and chant macrobeat and microbeat on neutral syllables back in episode 35, which focused on rhythm skills learned at the aural-oral skill level. I'll link to that in the show notes in case you'd like to go back and review it. Now, at the verbal association level, students' audiation of rhythmic context is further developed by learning to associate rhythm syllables to the macrobeat and microbeat in a familiar meter. Also, as students learn to chant macrobeat and microbeat with syllables, they learn to name meters by recognizing their microbeats. So, for example, if students have learned to audiate, move to, and chant the macrobeat and microbeat on neutral syllables and duple and triple meters at the aural-oral level, now, at verbal association, they'll chant those macrobeats and microbeats with rhythm syllables and use those syllables to start labeling the meter as duple meter or triple meter. Here's an example. Listen to my song. This time, let's move while I sing the song. Let's move to the macro beats. They sound like this. Do, 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 do. Let's sway to the macro beat while we chant. Do, do. Keep that going and listen to my song. So for the macro beats, we always chant do, 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 do. Now let's move to the micro beats of my song. The micro beats sound like this. Do-day, 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 do-day. Let's pat the micro beat while we chant. Do-day, do-day. Keep that going as you listen again. The microbeats we were audiating for that song were do-day, do-day. When we're audiating do-day, do-day for the microbeats, that means the song must be in duple meter. What are we in? Duple meter. And when we're in duple meter, the microbeats are do-day, do-day. And no matter what, the macrobeats are always do, do. This time, let's see if you can move to both macrobeats and microbeats while you listen to my song. So sway our bodies to the macrobeats, do, do, and patting the microbeat with our hands. Do-day, do-day, keep that going while you listen again. And when the microbeats are do-day, do-day, the song is in what? Duple meter. Because in duple meter, the microbeats are do-day, do-day. So let's talk about this process a little bit. Notice that I modeled performing the macrobeat and microbeat with syllables before asking you to perform them with syllables. This is because verbal association is a level of discrimination learning, so we need to make sure we model the skill before expecting students to perform it. If you simply said to the students, "Show me the macrobeat of this song," or "What are the microbeats that you're audiating?" and you didn't model that for them before you asked them to respond, they would be forced to make an inference by independently identifying the beat. Remember that in discrimination learning, students should be recognizing, not identifying. So be sure to model the macrobeat and microbeat with syllables for your students. In addition to modeling moving to and chanting the beat levels with syllables, I also modeled associating the name of the meter to the microbeat syllables. I didn't explain why, I didn't talk about note values or anything theoretical. I simply said, when we're audiating do-day, do-day as the microbeats, that means we're audiating in duple meter. We simply started associating the name duple meter to the microbeats do-day. We would do the same thing with triple meter by associating the name triple meter to the microbeats do-da-dee, do-da-dee. So at the verbal association level, you would have students move to the macrobeat and microbeat with the repertoire they're learning and chant those beat levels with rhythm syllables, as we did a minute ago. Once students can audiate and perform the macrobeat and microbeat separately, experiencing them both simultaneously will strengthen their audiation of meter. Now, moving to both beat levels simultaneously in your own body is actually pretty challenging from a coordination standpoint. So an easier way you might start would be to split students into two groups, with one group moving to and chanting the macrobeat with syllables, and the other group moving to and chanting the microbeat with syllables while you perform the song or chant. Then those two groups could switch parts. Next, if students were successful performing the macrobeat and microbeat in two separate groups, you might have students try performing both parts simultaneously by moving to one and vocalizing the other. So in the example from a moment ago, you could have students sway to the macrobeat and chant the microbeat. So while their body is moving to do, do, their mouth would be saying do, day, while you perform the song or chant. Then you could switch parts. The students would be vocalizing do for the macrobeat while they tap the microbeat on do-day, do-day. So they're only moving to one, and then they're chanting the other beat level. Then finally, if students are able to move to one beat level while vocalizing the other, they're probably ready to try moving to both beat levels simultaneously. So in the example from earlier, they might be swaying their bodies to the macrobeat while tapping the microbeat. They can do that while you perform the song or chant, and eventually they can move to the macrobeat and microbeat simultaneously while they perform a song or chant. Just be aware that moving to two beat levels simultaneously is quite challenging just from a coordination standpoint. And don't forget, anytime you're moving to macrobeats and microbeats and chanting the syllables for the beat levels, Be sure to label the meter. That's one of the big goals at the verbal association skill level. In addition to introducing syllables and performing patterns with syllables, we also use those syllables to start recognizing tonalities, meters, and functions. So anytime you're using rhythm syllables, just add in a quick labeling of meter. For the microbeats, we were chanting do day, do day. When the microbeats are do day, what's the meter? Duple meter. Just a quick mention like that will reinforce that vocabulary. So that's the basic way of introducing macrobeat and microbeat and labeling meter at the verbal association level. There are also lots of playful ways in which you can reinforce and practice audiating, moving to, and chanting the macrobeat and microbeat, many of which I talk about in my book, Weaving It All Together, which I'll link to in the show notes. Also, remember, I want to try something new on the podcast in the future. I want to try a listener idea or listener suggestion episode. If you have a favorite way that you like to get your students feeling and performing the macrobeat or microbeat with syllables, maybe a fun activity or a prop or a game you use to do that, please send me a brief description in an email or a voice memo, and I'll share it in an upcoming episode, giving you credit, of course. Now let's look at the next rhythm skill that is practiced at the verbal association level, which is echoing rhythm patterns with rhythm syllables. Remember that the skill of chanting rhythm patterns is important because it helps students develop a rhythm content vocabulary. Just as young children build a vocabulary of words to use in communicating with language, a vocabulary of rhythm patterns serves as the musical building blocks to help students develop their rhythm audiation and communicate their own musical thoughts. Then they can connect that pattern vocabulary to the repertoire they're learning, which is part of the whole learning process in MLT. So teaching rhythm patterns with rhythm syllables at verbal association can be pretty simple, like this. Do-da-dee-doo, do-da-dee-doo. Do-da-dee-doo, do-da-dee-doo. Repeat after me. Do-da-dee, do-da-dee, do-da-dee-doo. Do, do-da-dee, do-dee-doo. Do-da-dee, do, do-da-dee. Do, do-da-dee, do-ta-da-ta-dee-ta-doo. Do-ta-da-ta-dee-ta-doo-da-dee, do-ta-da-ta-dee-ta-doo-da-dee. Do, dee, do, dee, do-da-dee, do. And the microbeats for the patterns we were just chanting were do-da-dee, do-da-dee, so those patterns were in triple meter. So I started by establishing meter and noticed that it was on rhythm syllables because we're at the verbal association skill level. After I established meter, I asked you to echo and I performed short rhythm patterns with syllables in the given context. Those rhythm patterns were 4 macrobeats long, and one thing to notice is that I didn't pause before having you echo, and also I didn't breathe with you when it was time for you to breathe. When you do rhythm pattern instruction as the teacher, you don't pause because you want to keep the context going, and you don't want to breathe with students because you may be still chanting on the last macro beat before they're going to begin chanting. Like if you did the pattern do, do-da-dee, do, do-da-dee. There's no space to sneak in any kind of breath with the students before they begin chanting. So you just show students a gesture on the last full macro beat of your pattern, and that shows them when to take a breath and begin chanting themselves. Also, notice that I added in a quick labeling of meter at the end. Anytime you're using syllables for the microbeats, take a moment to label the meter. The more you reinforce those terms, the better students will retain them. There are learning sequence activity pages designed to focus on the skill of echoing rhythm patterns with rhythm syllables, and after teaching some group patterns, you can move on to inviting students to echo rhythm patterns with syllables in solo. Once students have experienced echoing rhythm patterns with syllables in learning sequence activities, there are tons of ways in which the skill of chanting rhythm patterns with syllables can be practiced through classroom activities. One simple way is to chant patterns for students to echo in between repetitions of a song or chant. Additionally, classroom activities can incorporate props or games to engage students and encourage chanting of rhythm patterns with syllables. One example is, let's say you're having students move a big stretchy band or a big coopper band. That's that big rubber band-like thing covered in colored fabric. That's great for moving to the beat, because if you still have some students who aren't quite audiating the beat independently, then they get to feel the beat by having other people move the scrunchie. So let's say you're moving the scrunchie, maybe you're having your students move it to the macro beat of a song and they're chanting do, 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 do to the macro beat of the song while they're singing it, or while you're singing it, I should say. Then maybe in between repetitions of the song, you could say, if you're touching this color, be my echo. So you could say, if you're touching red, echo my rhythm, do-day do, do-to-day do. If you're touching yellow, be my echo, do-day 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 do. So that's just one example of a way where you could take a prop, something fun and playful that you're using to help students feel the beat or to do some other musical goal, and then you just throw in some opportunities to echo patterns in between repetitions using that prop as a way to prompt the students. And again, I would love to do a future episode sharing listener suggestions. So please email or message me your favorite activity ideas for getting students to echo rhythm patterns with syllables, and I'd love to feature your idea in a future episode. Another important skill for students to learn at the verbal association skill level is to label and recognize the rhythm pattern function of familiar rhythm patterns they're hearing or performing with syllables. If you follow Gordon's rhythm content learning sequence, this would begin with macrobeat, microbeat function in duple and triple meters. Remember, I talk all about rhythm pattern function in the episode right before this, episode 44. I'll link to that in the show notes. So in Gordon's rhythm content learning sequence, we start with macrobeat, microbeat function rhythm patterns in duple and triple meters. So students would learn that a macrobeat, microbeat pattern, or MM for short, is made up of only macrobeats and microbeats. So in duple meter, an MM pattern includes only do's and do days, no tas, and no skipping any do's. To teach the skill level of labeling and recognizing functions of familiar rhythm patterns at the verbal association level, you could do something like this. Do-day do, do-day do. Do-day do, do-day do. Be my echo, do-day 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 do. Do-to-day-to do, do-to-day-to do-day. Do to do, do to do. Do do day, do do day. And the microbeats were do day, so those patterns were in duple meter, because in duple meter the microbeats are do day, do day. There are lots of different kinds of rhythm patterns in duple meter, and today we're going to be learning about one special type of pattern in duple meter. This type of pattern is made up of only macrobeats and microbeats, do's and do days, so we call it a macrobeat microbeat pattern. Try saying that. Macrobeat microbeat pattern. Now for short we call it MM. Try saying that. MM. There are two rules to remember that help us tell if a pattern is an MM in duple meter or not. Rule number one is that there are no tas in an MM pattern. If you hear any tas, even just one, it's not an MM. Rule number two is that we have to hear every do that we audiate. If a pattern has no tas and we hear every do we audiate, that pattern is an MM. Let's practice. I'm going to chant some patterns, and your job is to tell whether they're MM or not. If you hear a pattern with no tas and you hear every do that you're audiating, you'll say MM. Try that. MM. If you hear any tas or you don't hear every do that you audiate, you'll say no. Try that. No. Here's your first pattern. You decide MM or no. Do day do, do to day to do. Was that an MM? No. Why was that not an MM? Because there were tas. Yes, tas are not macrobeats or microbeats, so that was not a macrobeat microbeat pattern. How about this one? Do day do, do day do. That one was MM. How did you know that was an MM? Were there any tas? Nope, there were no tas. Did we hear every do that we audiated? Let's see. Let's get out our silent spider fingers where our fingers hang down like spider legs so they don't make any sound when we pat. Let's use our spider fingers to move to the macro beat, and your job is to whisper the macro beat while you move. Do, do, do. And see if I say every do that you're audiating. Ready? You whisper. Do, do. Here was the pattern. Do, day, do, day, do. Did we hear every do we audiated? Yes, I didn't skip any do's, so that pattern was an MM, a macrobeat microbeat pattern. How about this one? Do day, do. Was that MM or no? No. Did we hear any tas? Nope, there were no tas. Did we hear every do we audiated? Let's see. You keep the macrobeat again with your spider fingers and you whisper the macrobeat. Do. Do, and see if you hear every do you're audiating. Let's try it. You whisper, do, do. Here's the pattern. Do, day, do. Did you hear every do you audiated? No, there was one do that you were audiating that I didn't say. Whisper the macrobeat and listen again. See if you can hear that spot. Do, do. Here's the pattern. Do, day, do. So was that pattern an MM? No. And then you would go on with that, continuing to chant rhythm patterns with syllables to name as MM or no, and periodically pause to ask students, how did you know? And then you might have them explain, because if it was an MM, because it had no tas, and we heard every do we audiated. Or if it wasn't an MM, you might ask them why not, and they might say, because there were tas, or because I didn't hear every do I audiated. I would also suggest periodically reviewing the meter name, so saying, and tell me again, if the microbeats are do day, what meter are we audiating? Duple meter. Now, I'm not going to lie, teaching students to recognize rhythm pattern function can be challenging at first. This is why many MLT teachers I know choose not to teach their students to label rhythm pattern function. They think it's not worth it. But trust me, it is worth it in the long run. As I said in the previous episode on Gordon's system of classifying rhythm pattern function, it does pay off later. When students get to improvisation, you can use rhythm pattern function as a restriction. You could say, improvise only MM patterns in duple meter, or improvise a division elongation pattern in triple meter. And it gets the students thinking more about the sounds they're coming up with, rather than just opening their mouth and seeing what comes out. Rhythm pattern function is also valuable when students get to symbolic association and start reading and writing rhythm patterns, because they can see what those functions look like in notation. They can see what divisions look like. They can see what only macrobeats and microbeats looks like. It just makes sense to them. So yes, it may be hard to teach students to recognize MM patterns at first, but I found that when I spiral back around and teach them to recognize DE patterns, that stands for division elongation patterns, something clicks and it's so much easier. So if you've never taught your students to label rhythm pattern function before, or maybe you've tried it and you gave up because it was hard, I strongly encourage you to give it a try. If you're looking for more advice on how to teach students to recognize and label rhythm pattern function, Gordon's reference handbook for using learning sequence activities includes sample instructions to give to students. The first unit of learning sequence activities, or LSAs, focuses on MM patterns in duple and triple at the oral level, and then the second unit takes the same set of patterns and moves them to the verbal association skill level. The patterns themselves are found in the Rhythm Register book, and all the instructions for how to teach LSAs can be found in that reference handbook. I'll link to all those materials in the show notes. Speaking of LSAs and verbal association, a little side note. If you've taught LSAs before, you might be wondering why the pages in Rhythm Unit 2 are ordered the way they are. In the first unit, at the oral level, it starts with one page of echoing MM patterns in duple on neutral syllables, and then one page echoing MM patterns in triple on neutral syllables. Then, both of those pages are repeated in Unit 2 with rhythm syllables, but before that, Unit 2 starts with 2 pages where students learn to recognize and label MM function patterns in duple and then in triple. Like the tonal pattern function labeling pages in Tonal Unit 2, the rhythm pattern function labeling pages are placed first in Rhythm Unit 2 so that students would have an opportunity to hear the syllables, to be bathed in the sound of rhythm syllables and become acculturated to the sound of syllables before they have to start chanting those syllables themselves. However, there is a lot of information to take in on those first rhythm LSA pages at Verbal Association. The students have to learn that duple meter is when the microbeats are due day and that the macrobeats are always due, and then they have to learn how to recognize function. It's a lot. So to make this easier for my students, a few weeks before we were going to start Rhythm Unit 2 at Verbal Association, I would start to introduce syllables for macrobeats in classroom activities and introduce the idea that the macrobeats are always chanted on do, do. Then I would also start chanting microbeats with syllables in duple meter in classroom activities and start explaining that when the microbeats are due day, we're audiating duple meter. That way, when we started the first rhythm function labeling page in learning sequence activities, the students would already be familiar with syllables for macrobeats and microbeats and with the meter name, so they could just focus on learning how to recognize macrobeat-microbeat patterns. So don't be afraid to experiment with how LSAs are taught. And if you're newer to MLT and are wondering what the heck LSAs are, I talk about that back in episode 26. I'll link to that in the show notes. So back to labeling rhythm pattern function. After you've introduced macrobeat-microbeat patterns in duple or in triple in a focused way, like in LSAs, you can then have the students practice recognizing pattern function in classroom activities that are more playful and fun. For example, I used to use a little stuffed M&M beanie toy that I found on the internet and have the kids pass it around the circle while they performed a familiar song or chant. And then when the song or chant stopped, I would chant a pattern with syllables, and the student who was holding that stuffed M&M toy would either hold it up in the air if the pattern I chanted was an MM, or they would hide it behind their back if the pattern I chanted was not an MM. If you wanted to get more kids involved, you could cut colored circles out of construction paper, cardstock, or those foam sheets that you can get from the craft store, and you could write MM on them with a permanent marker. Then you could give every kid a cutout M&M to hold and have them either hold it up when they hear an MM pattern or hide it behind their back if the pattern you chant is not an MM. In addition to performing rhythm patterns with syllables and labeling their function and meter, connections can be made between familiar patterns and song or chant repertoire by recognizing where a particular pattern occurs within a song or chant. This is another important component of the final whole within the whole part whole learning process of MLT, in which students apply their audiation skills and pattern vocabulary to their performance and understanding of repertoire. To teach the skill of orally recognizing a familiar rhythm pattern with syllables within a familiar song or chant at the verbal association level, you might do something like this. Your job is to move to and chant the microbeats of my song, which are do day, do day, do day. You keep that going while I sing the song. Do day, here I go. Ya da 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 dum. Ya da da da. And the microbeats were do day, so the meter of that song was duple meter. Now, I have a special pattern. Listen and be my echo. It goes like this. Do to do day. Try it again. Do to do day. Was that pattern do to do day an MM pattern in duple meter? That pattern was not an MM because it had a ta. Do to do day. That pattern was a division pattern because tas are divisions of the microbeats. Now that pattern, do to do day, happens somewhere in my song. I'll show you. I'll sing the song again, and this time I'm going to clap that pattern, do to do day, when it happens in the song. What was that pattern again? Do to do day. Let's find it in the song. Ya da 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 dum. Ya da 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 dum. Did you hear that pattern? Do to do day in the song? That pattern, do to do day, happens 5 times in the song. I'm going to sing the song again, and let's all clap that rhythm pattern when it happens in the song. Do-ta-do day. Here we go. Ya-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Ya-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Let's do the song one more time, and this time, instead of clapping whenever the pattern do-ta-do day happens in the song, your job will be to chant it with rhythm syllables. Let's try it. You're going to chant do-ta-do day each of the 5 times it happens. Here we go. Do-ta-do day, do-ta-do day, do-ta-do day. Do-ta-do day, do-ta-do day. Notice that in that process, I didn't ask you to tell me where the pattern happened in the song independently. I was sure to tell you what the answer was before I asked you to show the pattern. If you wanted to have students generalize and find the pattern independently, that's fine if you're planning on doing inference learning. Then you could ask students to tell you where the pattern happens. But because verbal association is a discrimination level of learning, we always model the answers before asking students to recognize or perform the answers themselves. Now, these are the basic rhythm skills we help students learn at the verbal association level. Might not seem like a lot, but remember that you're going to find lots of ways to reinforce and practice these skills in lots of different classroom activities. And you can do this in lots of playful ways. You can use props, manipulatives, instruments, and also you can just toss the skills in briefly as an aside when doing other kinds of classroom activities. For example, if you were teaching students a folk dance, like a circle dance, you might pause in between repetitions and say, "Oh, by the way, the microbeats we're audiating in this dance music are doo-da-dee, doo-da-dee. So what meter is this music in? Triple meter." I give many ideas for teaching and reinforcing verbal association skills in my book, Weaving It All Together, and there are tons of ideas for verbal association activities in the Jump Right In General Music Series Teacher's Editions books. Books 1 and 2 are particularly good for oral and verbal association. I'll link to those in the show notes. And please, if you have a favorite verbal association activity, email me a description or record a voice memo of yourself describing it to everydaymusicality@gmail.com, and I would love to share your idea in a future episode. In the next couple of episodes, we'll continue our mini-series focused on verbal association by looking at bridging from verbal association to the generalization level of inference learning and bridging from verbal association to the creativity improvisation level of inference learning. Before I go, just a quick reminder that registration is open for this summer's Professional Development Levels courses, also known as PDLCs, offered through the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. I'll be teaching the Level 1 Elementary General Music course with Cindy Taggart at Michigan State University in June, and there are several other locations throughout the summer. I'll link to that info in the show notes, and I'll also link to the information about the 1-week online introduction courses that GIML is also offering this summer. There are 4 different online intro courses being offered: Elementary General, Early Childhood, Instrumental Music, and Piano. And the really great thing is that the more of those online intro courses you take, the better the price you get it for. And the registration cost for any of the online intro courses or the 2-week PDLCs also includes a complimentary 1-year membership to GIML. There are lots of benefits to being a GIML member right now, so I encourage you to join, especially if you're newer to MLT. One benefit that we offer is every fall or the end of summer, we offer our mentoring programs that's open for all members of GIML. You can serve either as a mentor if you're experienced in MLT, or if you're newer to MLT, you can sign up and get assigned a mentor, someone that you can go to with your questions or your concerns about MLT. So check out the benefits that GIML has to offer, and you will get that free 1-year membership when you enroll in a summer course. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day.